Hello, I'm Maria Hall Brown, and this is LA Currents. Well, he's only the third representative to represent the 34th District in Congress because it was only created in 1963. But I'm delighted today to be joined by Congressman Jimmy Gomez. So nice to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
All right, the 34th District is basically East LA and a portion of North Los Angeles.
Yeah, correct. It's Boyle Heights, downtown through Northeast LA, so the communities of Highland Park as well as Eagle Rock. Yeah, and it's been around for, the area's been represented before. It was Javier Becerra, and he was from like 93, 94 to 2017 when I took over. And then Ed Roybal had the seat for 30 years. 30 years.
I was shocked to see that you were just the third, but you know, third time's a charm. So congratulations for being there. Lots of interesting things have happened, obviously, in Congress this year. Most recently, the infrastructure bill has passed, so that's the Senate, excuse me. So that's kind of exciting. Is that a sort of a signal that there's a potential for bipartisan politics?
There's always a potential, and that's what I've always found, is that if you can agree on the problem and then agree on the solution, then you can pretty much get anything done. I helped negotiate the new USMCA, or the new NAFTA, against the Trump administration, and I'm one of the most progressive members of Congress. So there's always hope that bipartisanship is there, but it's if interests align. So the bipartisan deal is a big deal. Now we need to move forward with the budget reconciliation that the Democrats will probably go it at alone, but the Republicans are also not throwing up too many roadblocks when it comes to budget reconciliation. So I think in the end, sometime in September, October, we'll be passing both pieces of legislation, and it'll be a historic investment not only in our hard infrastructure, but also in people and working families in the country.
That's an interesting component to this. So this infrastructure element is obviously roads and all the things that make the country move, and waterworks, et cetera. But then there is this very interesting human element to it. And what are the areas there?
Well, it's first on the hard infrastructure, the bipartisan plan. People have to remember, President Trump had a infrastructure week almost every other month, and the Republicans couldn't get it done, and that's because they weren't compromising on certain aspects. Transit, for example. Transit is hugely important for LA, but they don't see transit as a main component. So the Democrats with Joe Biden were able to get it done, and I'm glad. And 19 Republicans ended up supporting it in the vote. So that's a big deal, but it still leaves off a lot of different things. Housing is a major issue here in Los Angeles. We need to have more affordable housing built. We need to also build up our housing stock, restore and rehabilitate a lot of our public housing. So housing is a big component, but also workers, right? We're going to transition to a cleaner economy, less reliant on fossil fuels. That means that they need to get trained for that new economy. So you're going to see an unprecedented investment in workforce training, trying to make community college free. In addition, you're going to also have make it easier for people to go to the workplace. So childcare. Childcare is a big barrier. Right now, we're facing a shortage. A lot of people are not doing it. I even had a staffer who came back on maternity leave. She had to delay her return because she couldn't find childcare. Paid family leave, that's a big deal. We have it here in California, but the rest of the country doesn't have it. And then trying to combat climate change is going to be crucial as well. So you're going to see a massive investment across the board, but it's not easy. One of the things we want to do is make sure that the money gets to the communities that have the most need. And a lot of the programs in the past haven't been that way.
Well, I'll jump to money to communities, because actually you just secured funding for 10 community projects in your district. And the total was over $11 million, correct, which is a goodly amount of funding that is going to help these community efforts. So what were the projects and how will they help District 34?
No, great question. So there's two parts, right? The community funding projects, right, were the appropriation earmarks, and then the Vest in America Act that included $20 million that I secured. So okay, $5 million is for the LA Union Station to help with the high-speed rail redesign of the line to make it go through. So there's projects on transportation that are getting included in the infrastructure package, and then there's these community funding plans. These are just everything that our district needs. Housing. The County of LA asked for a grant for a design project for turning a parking lot in Chinatown into affordable housing. We got money for that. The combating climate change. Most people don't know, but in order to get the highest reductions, you need to restore your habitat, riparian corridors, rivers, lakes. So we got $3.6 million for the engineering necessary for doing what they call the arbor study between the 134 in downtown for the LA River to restore that. That is, we got 3.5 for that. We got money for White Memorial for one of their labs that they needed to buy expensive equipment. We got money for Boyle Heights to do urban greening and cooling, cool pavement. So it's so we got a lot of great projects, and then investing in our students from disadvantaged backgrounds, having them have counselors through Para los Niños, as well as Project SOARS that operate in some of the government housing. So I'm proud of those projects. We had 110 submissions, but each member of Congress can only select 10 and submit those 10. This was the first time we've done it in, I would say, 11 years. Out of the 435 members of Congress, 310 had never participated in any kind of appropriations project request that we did. So everybody was coming into it new. We didn't know what would get funded, but these were good, valuable projects. And we ended up getting also $1 million for Highland Park Arts Center. And this is turning an old armory into an art center, matching with Prop K funds that have been on the books for a while. Just needed the extra money to start the program.
That's a lot.
Yeah, it's a lot.
And it's highly complex, obviously, the way it's all managed in regards to federal funds that help local areas. But you're also very outspoken about a couple of other issues in regards to general health and welfare. You were very much a part of lauding the federal eviction moratorium.
Yeah.
And that demonstrated that it was very important to you. What are those things that are important to you? And I'll also add on to that the issues that need to be addressed considering the ramifications of the pandemic, such as SNAP, et cetera, the food programs.
The pandemic just showed, I think, in stark terms, what a lot of people already knew, that there is a big wealth disparity in this country. There's an opportunity disparity in this country, and that we have to take steps to actively combat it. Who was getting infected more? Those people who were working class backgrounds that had to go into work, that had no choice but to go into work to support their family. It was immigrants, it was Latinos, it was African Americans. Those were disproportionately getting the coronavirus and dying from it. Additionally, they're the ones that were also losing their jobs, struggling. So the eviction moratorium, we were fighting for, first, rent relief last year in the HEROES Act. We got it in the appropriations, $25 billion in the December appropriations. Means that it was going to go out to help people stay in their homes. We also passed another $25 billion, roughly, in the American Rescue Plan in March, once Joe Biden became president. That allows us to, good example, City of LA, $243 million in rent relief. That's on top of the $100 million they used from the CARES Act the federal government passed last year. So keeping people in their homes is number one. If you don't, you're just going to have more people living on the streets, and then trying to deal with that problem on the street level is going to be more difficult. So I'm proud that the local officials passed an eviction moratorium extension on their own. However, the federal eviction moratorium was being challenged by the realtors and different folks. And if they would have succeeded and we didn't expand it, they would have came after the local and the state. So they go hand in hand.
And short it up.
Yeah, so we were fighting for every eviction moratorium extension since myself, Ayanna Pressley, Corey Bush, different folks, because we know what it would mean for working families. I ended up pushing the Biden administration, and I don't care if it's Republican or Democrat, when it's going to impact my constituents or the people, I'm going to fight for them. We ended up spending the nights on the steps of the Capitol to bring attention to the issue. I stayed with Cori Bush, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Ayanna Pressley, and we just made an argument that the president had the authority. He just needed to find the new justification to do it, which he ended up doing and extending it. So it was a big win. But if we were going to allow it to expire, you could see thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, of more people on the streets, and it would only make the homelessness crisis even bigger than it already is.
All right, well, we sort of addressed the tone and tenor of Congress in the fact that there are some very positive, proactive things happening in a bipartisan way. But there's also been some drama, controversy, and challenges. And you very clearly and succinctly called out Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene, and she's obviously lost her ability to be on committees, et cetera. Where does that stand right now? Because that was also a very dramatic experience for you. It continues to be a dramatic experience. There were some, physical threats, et cetera, that have been addressed to you. How are you feeling right now? Are you going to continue the fight? Do you still feel as strongly, et cetera?
Yeah, and this is regards to the insurrection that occurred and the mob that broke in on January 6th. That day should be something that kind of gets burned into people's memory. And the reason why is that the great American experiment is not just about freedom, but it's also about the ability to have the freedom to self-govern, right? That it's we the people, right? Make the decisions together, not by one person or one party, but everybody collectively. And when one group of individuals tries to overturn an election, that threatens our system of government to its core. That day when I was stuck in the gallery, that's where I actually thought our democracy would come to an end. Split thought. And then as people were getting evacuated, the mob is banging on the door of the gallery chamber, which is 3 floors up from the street level. I was deeply concerned about the end of our friend, to be honest with you. But I couldn't really think about it. I had to kind of help members get out. Try to run and get out as quickly as possible. I always thought the way our government would come to an end is that people would lose their freedoms first, and then they'll lose their democracy. But on January 6th, it taught me that we almost lost our democracy first, and then our freedoms would have come after that. So it was a big deal, and Marjorie Taylor Greene was part of that what I call QAnon caucus, who had consistently spread lies about the election being stolen, about Democrats being a cabal of blood-drinking, pedophile, Satan worshipers, and that kind of rhetoric, liking the fact that Pelosi should have a bullet put in her head. That kind of rhetoric is dangerous to a democratic society because it instigates violence. It's not about just about what she says, is that she's trying to instigate people to act a certain way, to do certain things. It's just like you can't go into a crowded movie theater and yell fire, right? You have freedom of speech, but there's also constraints on where it is appropriate. And right now, the Republicans are not backing off. Like, they're saying that nothing really happened on January 6th. I can't remember how many police officers died. You just had another police officer, Capitol police officer, who took his life. The trauma that was caused is still, people are still feeling it. Members of Congress are still feeling it. I know that I'm on a group chat with members who were in the gallery. We call it the gallery group because we felt like we were left behind.
It's like 9 of you, was it?
There was about 20 of us that were locked in, and it's still that trauma and what people are feeling. But we're fighting a two-front fight. One is to protect our democracy, to restore and build up our institutions again. And the other one is to make sure that we have an economy that works for every single person. And they kind of go hand in hand. When people think that things are fixed, that they can't get ahead, that if they do all the right things, that their kids are not going to be able to go to college, they're not going to be able to buy a house, that creates this alienization and this lack of confidence in the institutions. They go hand in hand. So we have to do both. And that's why the American Rescue Plan was critical, the child tax credit, but also the infrastructure package and the budget reconciliation to restore people. Like, government can work. And I want people to avoid saying all Republicans or all Democrats, because when we do that, then it's too easy to demonize. It's too easy to not to listen to one another. There is a big chunk of Republicans that don't want government to work. But on January 6th, we all were in one room together, and we decided to go back to finish the job. And I think at that moment, in good conscience, some of them decided to do the right thing after all.
Your road to Congress is fascinating for a number of reasons. I mean, you're the child of immigrant parents. You are one of several children. You watched your parents work really, really hard to make ends meet. And you weren't exactly a great student at one point in time.
Wasn't.
You ultimately ended up to be a great student, but you weren't.
Yeah.
So what did you see and what did you hear and what were you taught that gave you the impetus, the courage? And I know there was almost a pivotal moment in school that made you think about this, that thought, okay, I can do this. I can move forward and I can be a public servant and I may be able to affect change.
Yeah. First, my parents were from Mexico. My dad actually came here as a bracero, worked in the fields. It was a program for farm workers back in the 40s and the 50s. He came in the late 50s. He was like one of the last cohorts to come out here. And they were married, and they lived and had 4 kids in Mexico, and lived in a one-room adobe house. I've seen it. There's, the restroom was outside, as in like no restroom at all. You just go into the jungle. It felt like a jungle. And they worked the land, and whatever they grew, they sold. That's how they lived. So their experience was very different. And then when they came here, my brother Javier and I were born. I was born in Fullerton, California. We moved to Riverside when the house that they're living in was bought up by a developer to turn it into a strip mall. And we moved out there, and they bought a house. And for them was like owning a home was everything. That meant they had to work 4 or 5 jobs a week to make ends meet. We didn't have health insurance, so one of us got sick, whatever home remedies that they could come up with to make us feel better. But sometimes they would wait too long when we got sick. So when I was about 7 years old, I got sick with pneumonia, spent a week in the hospital, and it almost bankrupted my family between the missed shifts at work for my parents because they wanted somebody there all the time when I was there, and the extra payments. And how do I know that? Well, my siblings blamed me for not having presents that year for Christmas.
Oh,
so,
poor little guy.
Yeah, so they didn't teach us, it wasn't like Ozzie and Harriet where we sit around the table and they would give us a lecture of what we should learn from a particular moment. It was more like setting an example. You work hard, you take care of your family, you make sure that you're doing well by your community, and you give to people who have less than you. And those were kind of the examples. And they taught us by taking us back to Mexico. When I went back to Mexico, I got to see where they lived, as I mentioned, and realized that my life, if I was born there and we stayed there, would be completely different than what it is today. I wouldn't have the opportunity to, graduate from high school. And as you said, I was not the best student. I worked at Subway and Target from 5 in the afternoon to 10:30 at Subway to midnight to 9 in the morning. I worked at Target. Oh, wow. I got to go to a community college that I never would have got to go because that's not how it works in Mexico. They don't have, you have to pay as you go. You have to have that money. So it was this system that gave me an opportunity. And I wanted to be a doctor because I didn't have health insurance. I wanted to take care of people. But I went to a class or a workshop on political activism, and something just clicked. This guy from labor taught about how one person can make a difference. One person could, but when they organize and they work with others, it can make a bigger difference. I got it. I ended up deciding I was going to change my major to political science. ended up transferring UCLA and then Harvard University for my master's. And I always say the kid that would never be voted most likely to succeed in high school ended up going to one of the best universities. But things are not perfect. I get it. The opportunities, I don't think I'm the exception to the rule. There's many people with my story, but we got to make it even more, that exception or those stories need to be more frequent. And that's one of the things, that's why I fight for working class people. How do we make it better? But I know for a fact that still this country gives more opportunities for people from other places than any other country on the face of the world.
Wow. So from there, California State Assembly.
Correct.
And some of the issues that you care about at the California State Assembly, you have taken with you to Washington, D.C. You know, you're talking about climate change and family leave, et cetera. And one of the things that you have actually included in, you know, some of your interests is this, you know, availability and opportunity for people to not only have educational experiences and to have security in terms of their work, but this transit to trails.
Oh, yeah.
I thought that was really interesting, and just getting out of your close-knit environment and have an opportunity to see things outside of your realm that might be inspiring from a natural standpoint. How did that come about?
Well, growing up, I grew up in Riverside, and when we go on trips, we didn't go on vacations like a traditional family because we didn't have the money. We would go, if we went to Mexico, it was in the back of a pickup truck, and my dad would drive all the way to his hometown, and that's how we'd get there. But going to a national park where they had an entrance fee was always a barrier, because are you going to spend that $5 or $10 on the entrance fee, or are you going to spend it on food, on tortillas and beans or eggs for your family, right? It's a matter of making decisions. And when I got to go visit the Santa Ana River, which was close to my house, that was where I would go play. I would go cool off, go during the summer months. But I always wanted to go to these national parks. And that's something that kind of sat with me. And then even during the pandemic, like the open space kept my sanity. I would take long walks.
You and a lot of us, all of us, seriously.
And so coming up with the Transit to Trails Act was about, how do you give people from urban areas or disadvantaged communities that don't necessarily have the resources or the transportation to visit our public lands and our national parks, how do you give them access? So this bill, the Transit Trails, what Cory Booker introduced in the Senate, would allow to create a federal grant program for communities and nonprofits to apply for the grant so that they can take kids from the urban centers to the parks or to the public lands. There's programs out there like that, but not to the scale that we need so that people can see what's beyond their front door or their neighborhood. And when you do that, it's not just about, hey, giving them a chance to go play in the water or in the mountain. It's about showing them that there are opportunities beyond their neighborhoods, that they can decide to go off to grad school like I did on the East Coast, right? To experience that part of America or to experience something else. So Transit to Trails is to kind of open people's imagination and perspective while giving them a place to recreate and enjoy the outdoors.
What are some of the other things? I mean, you mentioned an arts program that you were trying to get motivated and going in your district. So what are the other areas of?
So the Arts District, another thing, like it's all about personal experience. When I was growing up, I wanted to play an instrument. My parents didn't have money to buy the instrument, to rent the instrument, so our school district didn't provide it. So, now I think about, and I saw somebody, this is kind of an interesting story. I saw a friend who's well off, his adopted daughter from a certain type of family that doesn't have resources. I saw her one day come up, jump on the piano, and just start playing. She was 8 years old. Amazing, it was beautiful. And it got me thinking about nature versus nurture. If she was left with her family, right, her biological parents, would she be able to play the piano like she was doing? Would she be able to speak a couple of languages like she's doing? So that's kind of what I want. When I think about how do we help kids, is how can we bring out their their God-given potential that is only nurtured if they have access to resources and teachers. Another issue I'm working on is I'm a big fan of the community college system. I'm a big fan of trying to help students because I believe education is the best way to change people's lives, but they struggle. I worked 2 or 3 jobs when I was in the community college. If my parents kicked me out, I wouldn't be able to afford my books. But I had enough. But in that days, I didn't have even enough money to pay for the bus. I usually, one day, because my bike had a flat tire, I didn't have any money. I walked 3 miles from the community college home. And in Riverside, when it's blazing hot, 3 miles is far.
Ride.
So I'm working on a bill called the EATS Act, Enhanced Access to SNAP Benefits, would give access to food stamps to students who are in college full time. And so they don't have to work in order to pay for food. They would have a little extra help. And it was interesting. I knew it was a big deal, but a friend of mine who I met, she worked for the majority leader in Congress once upon a time. She's done well for herself. She texted me out of the blue about this bill, and she said, your bill made me cry because it reminded me of when I was in college and my family didn't have enough money. And she goes, and I would go days without eating, and I would drink water in order to fill up the stomach. So that kind of story is more common than people think, and trying to help, especially kids that are trying to change their lives by going to school, make it a little easier. That's what I'm trying to do with the EATS Act and other pieces of legislation.
So are you feeling optimistic? Are you feeling positive? I mean, you get a little bit of a downtime now that you're on break, but lots of work ahead. But are you feeling as if we're moving in a good direction and that government is efficiently working or has the potential to?
Yeah, I do feel optimistic when it comes to different things that we've done. But you have to make different decisions if you want different results. And during the American Rescue Plan, we passed an expanded monthly child tax credit. This is the child tax credit has been around. It's not new. And the Republicans expanded it, but didn't the amount of money you would get. But they didn't make more people eligible. So when we actually expanded in the American Rescue Plan, you don't need to owe taxes in order to get the child tax credit. And it ranges anywhere from $250 to $300 per child per month, paid monthly. So that one bill, that one piece of legislation is cutting child poverty from anywhere from 45% to 61% in this country. One policy change. So policy can work if you make different decisions when you're shaping that policy. Who is it going to help? Who is it going to impact? And does it work? How are you going to implement it? So I am hopeful that people are seeing the results of what we're trying to do that will lead us to make better decisions, different decisions when it comes to housing, homelessness, climate change, education, where we target resources so that we can get a bigger return on our hard-earned tax dollars that are being invested in these communities. So I'm hopeful, but we're in this still a struggle. I go back and forth. Hopeful that we can make the positive change, but also understand the fight that we're in for.
Changing people's minds. So if people want to learn more about what you're doing locally and nationally? Yeah,
Gomez.house.gov is my website, or they can go to my Twitter, which is @Rep Jimmy Gomez, or my Instagram, which is @Rep Jimmy Gomez. And those are 2 places where they can follow along.
Are you folks proud?
Yeah, they're definitely proud. My dad passed away. He wasn't around to see it, but he was always proud for him. And then my mom was, she's always been proud, no matter what I did. That's I think what made them great parents. They didn't care if I became an elected official or if I worked at a job where I was just taking care of my family. They would have been proud either way.
And that's a wrap on this LA Currents.